You know, if you think about it, this movie's kind of a metaphor for this year's summer blockbuster season. What's going on, everybody, and welcome to my review of Christopher Nolan's latest film, Oppenheimer. And this has been one of the more hotly anticipated films of the year for many film fans. Not only because Christopher Nolan's name is attached to it, and that guy just brings the cinephiles out in droves, but also because of this little social movement that's been going on called Barbenheimer. I just reviewed Barbie yesterday. Please check out that wild review. And then, yeah, I followed that up by checking out Oppenheimer a couple hours later, which is definitely the way to do it. I can't imagine watching Oppenheimer and then walking into Barbie. That would just fuck up my entire psyche. But I'm a huge fan of quite a few Christopher Nolan films. About half of them, I would say, are definitely close to, if not in my top favorites of all time. The Prestige, Inception, Insomnia, highly underrated. Of course, the Dark Knight trilogy, all fantastic movies. Here lately, though, his movies haven't quite been my cup of tea. Basically everything after the Dark Knight trilogy that he's been doing, going more of a historical route, and even Tenet, which was very sci-fi, just didn't never come together completely for me. It just wasn't really my thing. And so, while I love and adore the man as a filmmaker, and while his name immediately piques my interest, I've been walking into a lot of his movies lately a little bit guarded because it doesn't quite seem Christopher Nolan is making movies for me anymore. And I walked into Oppenheimer with that exact same reservation, even though every single review and every single early reaction that I saw was using those gigantic 15-letter words to talk about how mesmerizing and earth-shattering and life-changing of an experience watching this movie was. I just walked into it going, okay, it's probably going to be amazing, but is it going to be a movie that I'm truly going to enjoy and want to rewatch and tell everybody that everybody should go check this thing out? That I wasn't sure about. So for those that don't know, and I don't imagine there's many of you that are interested in this film that wouldn't, but this film is about J. Robert Oppenheimer, the guy that basically gave birth to nuclear weapons. He was the physicist that was hired by the US government during World War II to create a nuclear weapon that they could use against Germany, and then eventually, as history showed, we didn't use it on them, we used it on Japan, and the only two times in history that a nuclear weapon has been used in a fight. And so it's about the creation of the weapon as well as the psyche of the man who created it and the ambition of the man that created it, and then also the fallout of it in, many different meanings of that word. And so when you boil all that down, this is a historical biopic drama. This is by far the most straightforward story that Christopher Nolan has done yet. And for a lot of people, that's going to make it his best work yet. For a lot of people, I think it's going to make it one of the less appealing stories that he's ever given. But as far as what I thought of it, getting into the positives, look, a lot of this stuff is not really going to be any unique thoughts that I'm bringing to the table, not some new insightful information. Christopher Nolan is a master at what he does. There is no accident that this guy is one of, if not the most prestigious director name working today. Just his name sells the ticket. He is the movie star when you have a Christopher Nolan out there. It doesn't matter what A-list actor is working with him, Christopher Nolan's name is what is the big, bold letters on the poster. He has a very unique way of doing movies and telling stories, and at the same time, he also harkens back to kind of the golden age of filmmaking, especially over his last couple of projects, that in and of itself is very refreshing, being that we are in this very modern movie-making craze lately with a lot of CGI and spectacle and big blockbusters. He really holds on to the theatrical experience of olden days. And so somewhere between those two things mixing, oftentimes we get some form of brilliance in the filmmaking. And that absolutely carries forward into Oppenheimer. This is a 3-hour film that is 99% dialogue. There is no action sequences. There is very little spectacle, even though I see that word getting tossed around a lot. I don't know what movie they watched. I mean, yeah, the bomb scene, the actual testing scene was cool. And the fact that they did it practically and didn't do it by CGI is impressive. But this is a dialogue-driven movie all the way. And so it takes a very special kind of filmmaker to be able to have 3 hours of people talking to each other and have it be as riveting as Oppenheimer ended up being. And he chose to tell this movie directly from the perspective of Oppenheimer. And there's a lot of things going on in the storytelling where you're really only getting his end of it. You're getting his interpretation in his head. They even visualize that in really creative ways. Again, impressively without CGI, where sometimes he's having a conversation and his mind is elsewhere and they're visualizing what he's thinking while he's saying something completely differently. And to a certain degree, it's all about the relationships that he builds throughout the years, both as a student, as a teacher, then eventually as the guy that's leading the Manhattan Project. And so it very much becomes an experience through this guy's eyes, throughout this entire historical event, and throughout all of the different people that he interacts with, from a working relationship to a personal relationship, and how that affects him as a human being, especially after the nuclear weapons have been used. And it's just a very interesting way to tell this type of story. And so the way Nolan chooses to tell this historic event is by putting you in the shoes, in the perspective of the man that quite literally gave death incarnate to the world, that gave us this weapon of mass destruction that has completely changed warfare and completely changed the definition of safety and threat from other countries and other powers, to a point where it literally changed life as we know it. And we don't often think back at it like that. So it's a very thought-provoking film, and a movie that you'll walk out not feeling so safe anymore. You know, a lot of us that have quote-unquote normal lives, that are able to enjoy the privilege of not having to live in a lot of horrible circumstances that a lot of the world deals with, you don't often stop and think about a looming threat like that could go off and change the world in seconds. And we would never know about it, never have any warning of it until it came. And one of the reasons that Nolan is able to achieve what he does with the storytelling here is because he surrounds himself with an unbelievable cast. The names that you're going to hear more often is Cillian Murphy, who is playing the titular character, and he is awesome. I love that guy, and he's usually just side roles. This is one of the first movies I've seen him actually take a main role, and he absolutely owns it. He's said numerous times that he's not really somebody that's interested in Oscars. That's not why he does certain things. That's not why he takes the projects that he takes, but I'd be shocked if he does not have at least a nomination by the end of the year for his performance. And with him specifically, there's something really eerie about just the facial expressions that Cillian Murphy brings. Like, sometimes there is emotions and there's things going on in the head of the character of Oppenheimer that he's able to convey with just a still face and just the way that his eyes look, with no dialogue whatsoever. You can look at Cillian Murphy and totally get what he is trying to convey off of the page just using his face. Another big name you're going to hear a lot is Robert Downey Jr., one of the, if not the best thing that he has done outside of the MCU, which has taken over most of his career over the last decade plus, and he's awesome here. He's incredible. I mean, that guy has continuously proven, both in and outside of Marvel, that he is one of the best actors working, and I'm glad that he got a project like this that wasn't lambasted like The Judge, or what the fuck was that, Doolittle, or whatever the hell he did not too long ago. I'm glad he found something like this, because he's able to really stretch his legs as an actor and remind everybody, I'm Robert Downey Jr., bitch. Beyond those main two names, I loved seeing Josh Hartnett in this. Another one of those actors that I just still don't quite understand where his career fell off in the late 2000s. He seemed like he was on the path to being a new A-list actor, and then just kind of went away for a while, and he's been sprinkling back into movies here and there over the past number of years. Really interesting seeing that guy. Of course, Emily Blunt and Florence Pugh as the two different love interests for Oppenheimer. Both of them are great, and they're among the best working actresses today. But I would spend 20 minutes just telling you all the different actors of note in this movie. I mean, it's insane that all throughout the 3 hours you have main characters, you have side characters, you have people that show up for one scene, a couple lines of dialogue that are like massive names. And you're like, did I just see that Oscar-winning actor for 30 seconds in this movie? How does that work? It's because everybody wants to work with Nolan. And so it was really cool, as somebody that loves movies and is very knowledgeable on actors out there and has a lot of love for a lot of actors, to just see so many actors that I've known and loved throughout my life just pop up into this movie randomly throughout it. It was like a Where's Waldo of actors. Josh Peck is in this movie, for Christ's sake. We go from Drake and Josh to Cillian Murphy and Robert Downey Jr., and basically every actor in between. Also, something that I don't often bring up in reviews because it's not really a standout feature of the filmmaking, filmmaking, the editing in this movie was incredible. And it's also one of those huge tools that Nolan uses to tell this story in a very specific way, especially with using the kind of first-person perspective of Oppenheimer throughout a lot of the story. And there's scenes that just seamlessly transition with these certain visuals that are letting you into the mind of Oppenheimer. The way that they build tension through the editing, like specifically in the scene in like the middle of the film when they're getting ready to test the nuclear bomb and they're editing through all these different images, which more often than not, editing at its best is when you don't notice it. But very rarely you get a movie like this where you absolutely notice the editing, and it's one of the strengths of the storytelling. There is also a very good and haunting score here. It's the same guy that did the score for Tenet, so if you appreciated those pieces of music, you'll appreciate this. And again, all the things that I'm listing kind of work in synergy for achieving the tone and achieving the effect that Nolan is going for, which is to inform you and then terrify you at the same time with US history, well, world history at that. And the score, especially in certain sequences when they're trying to build this sense of dread, works really well to achieve that. And one of the things as far as building that sense of dread that I really appreciated about this movie is, in such a subtle way, it shows numerous times how cold and remorseless and evil human beings can be, especially when they start getting into more government type characters that are just making these massively impactful decisions just flippantly, like it doesn't even matter. Literally, they're trying to find like where in Japan would be the best place to drop this bomb to make a point. And there's a guy that points out and he goes, well, we can't do that island because I vacation there. It's what the fuck? There's a meeting between Harry S. Truman and Oppenheimer in the third act of the film that makes you just go like, how many presidents were like that? All of them? Because holy shit, that's fucking cold. Even in scenes where there's not really a dialogue exchange, where you get the creation of the atomic bomb, you get the successful first test, the Trinity test, and then it hard cuts to the government just packaging up Fat Man and Little Boy and going, thanks dude, we got it from here, fuck off, we make the decisions now. And even just the reality of the Trinity test itself and the unpredictability and the uncharted territory of nuclear weapons multiple times throughout the film, and kind of anchored by one conversation with Albert Einstein that is very integral in the movie. They keep talking about, well, it's a very minute chance, it's near zero, but there is a chance that when we perform this test, it's going to destroy the entire world. It's going to go into the atmosphere, and it's going to be a chain reaction that we can't stop.
Chances are near zero. Near zero. What do you want from theory alone? Zero would be nice.
And because the chance is low enough, they're like, fuck it, let's go ahead with the test. And it just makes you think, how many times throughout history, and maybe even how many times in our everyday lives today, is there our government or another government out in the world that is making decisions like that, that could literally decimate life as we know it, and we have no knowledge of it. It just happens while we sleep at night, just thinking everything's a-okay. It takes a special kind of filmmaker to make you look back at very well-known facts, very well-known events in history that most people would be able to tell you the names of the atomic bombs and the war that we used them in and who we used it on. But you have all these extra details in there that just makes it so much more of a horrific event and a horrific implication for life as we know it that has gone on since the 1940s and 50s, that it just, filmmakers that can open your eyes and make you ask questions that you've never asked before in your life and walk out of a theater with conversation pieces to have with those that have seen the movie, that's something special. And whether or not this is my type of film or your type of film or your type of story, you can't deny how special it is that we still get movies and filmmakers that can achieve that.
You are the man who gave them the power to destroy themselves. And the world is not prepared.
Now, with all that being said, I've seen massive praise for this movie. I've seen people calling it best of the year, one of the best of all time, the best of Nolan, the best ever. And being completely honest, I'm not that. I'm not on that wavelength. This is not really my type of film. This is not the type of film that I would normally get excited about if I was not covering movies for a living. This is absolutely not a movie that I would probably ever rewatch. And if I was grading purely my enjoyment factor, just the enjoyment of going out and experiencing a story, It's not very high for a movie like this. 3 hours of a ton of dialogue, a very dense script with a lot of facts and implications, and I can absolutely acknowledge the masterful filmmaking and acting and editing at play here, but at the end of the day, is it an experience that I just adored? Is it an experience that I'm going to tell everybody that they have to have? Is it an experience that I'm going to pop in the Blu-ray as soon as it comes out and re-experience it? No, it's not. I'm not really a history buff. That was always my least favorite subject in school. Some people love history, some people don't. Some people love math, some people don't. I've never really been all that enamored with historic facts. They just don't interest me so much. I'm not really somebody that's all that interested in nuclear physics and physicists and atomic energy and all the scientific stuff in the first act of the film. And it goes into kind of a courtroom drama type feel in the third act as well, and it's peppered throughout the film in the first 2 acts, and even courtroom dramas aren't often my type of thing. And so this kind of confirms what I was saying in the beginning, which is that here lately, Christopher Nolan doesn't really make movies for me. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing that says every movie has to be for me. But at the same time, as much as I respect him as a filmmaker, as much as I can acknowledge all the things that were done so wonderfully in this movie, this is not the type of movie experience that I'm going to look back at 2023 and say, God, I remember that day. Cannot wait to experience that again. I'm just not. And I can't help but always feel a little bit cynical and a little bit in doubt of a lot of the hyperbolic reactions that I see a lot of people give. I mean, just the words of masterpiece and life-changing, and I literally stood up and I was sitting in my own sweat when the Oppenheimer title card came up at the end. And it's like, did you really? Like, maybe I just don't experience movies on the level that some of you guys do, but some of that stuff, I hear it and I'm just like, get the fuck out of here, man. I absolutely believe there's a lot of people that adore this movie. This is a cinephile's movie, and the people that adore filmmaking and are very knowledgeable and educated on filmmaking and appreciate the thing that Christopher Nolan continuously brings and is able to do with these massive budgets and A-list actors just stacked in his cast, no doubt in the world that those people are just going to walk out enamored with this movie. But this is not a movie that's for everybody. And I don't think saying that the newest magnum opus by Christopher Nolan is not particularly your thing should merit the response that I've seen a couple of people getting. I mean, Twitter's gonna Twitter, the YouTube comment section is gonna be the YouTube comment section, but we got to get better as movie fans. Not everything has to be for everybody. Not all of us have to agree on everything. You could acknowledge the things that were done great about a movie that's not particularly for you, the same way that you could acknowledge the faults in a movie that you love. There is a lot of space in the middle for conversations on films. Everything doesn't have to be a 10 out of 10 or a 0 out of 10. Giving a food analogy, I can look at somebody and say, wow, that is a masterful chef. That person is a master of their art. I'm mesmerized watching them create this plate of food. But if you put a plate of food in front of me that's not really my taste, I'm not going to walk away and say, damn, that was delicious. Now, with all that out of the way, my actual negatives regarding this film. The main one, and it doesn't just upset me, it actually pisses me off that I have to say this again, and I've seen a couple other people say it, so it wasn't just me, it wasn't my theater. The audio mix on the dialogue. I can't hear you! What has been going on with Nolan's movies since Dark Knight Rises to where this is like a sporadic issue that keeps coming up? I saw Tenet in 2 separate theaters, had the issue in both different theaters. I saw Oppenheimer last night, and I'm not bullshitting you when I tell you that a third of the dialogue, maybe, indistinguishable. I didn't know what the fuck they just said because the music swelling and the sound effects and everything, that mix is so loud and the dialogue is so muted in certain segments that I could only 100% discern what people were saying when it was only dialogue being displayed to the speakers. If there was music or anything else going on and people were talking, I had to like really focus in. And it's hard to really absorb storytelling and absorb themes and everything that the movie is intending to do when you're using most of the energy of your brain just to be able to hear what the fuck people are saying.
Do you understand the words that are coming out from my mouth? Don't nobody understand the words that are coming out of your mouth, man.
And the reason why that is so frustrating, especially as somebody that has to get on camera and express why they didn't have the best experience with this movie, is because when you have a 3-hour movie that is 99.9% dialogue, just dudes in a room talking, and you can't hear a third of it, That is infuriating. That is infuriating as a viewer because you are missing important things throughout the story, and there's so many times in the second and third act where somebody would pop back up or they would reference something that happened, and I would wonder if I missed something because I had no idea what the hell the implication of that person being there or what they were talking about was. And maybe if I saw the film again and I could hear all the dialogue perfectly, maybe that was an intended part of the storytelling to just kind of catch you off guard because you're only seeing it through the perspective of Oppenheimer. But so many times when I felt a little lost with what was going on, I couldn't help but attribute it to, oh, it must have been one of those fucking dialogue scenes in the first act that I couldn't hear. I just don't understand, like, sound mixing seems to be such a basic level of movie making competence that I don't understand why this has become a recurring issue with one of the most masterful filmmakers that have ever lived here recently. And it's been happening too often in his movies for me to think this was just a fluke or this was just a one-time issue or maybe it was my theater. I just can't go there. I got to think, oh, well, this is just Nolan continuing to do his sound mix the way that he does. And as a viewer, I just don't understand the artistry with that choice. To me, it's just frustrating as all hell. Moving beyond that, and again, some of this might be solved if I could just hear more of the dialogue in the movie. There are so many characters and so many people that come in and out of the life of Oppenheimer throughout the film, and we're having such a restrictive point of view with pretty much all being with Oppenheimer, that there were many characters that I could never really comprehend what their importance of the relationship to Oppenheimer was, or even really completely characterize what their relationship was, even down to his love interest. Like, his relationship with Florence Pugh seems very minimalist and is there just to have this specific thing come up in the third act as an issue that he now has to solve. And his relationship with Emily Blunt, who is his wife throughout most of the film, I never could get a grasp on how happy their marriage is or how in love they were or what her thoughts on Oppenheimer was, because there'd be one scene where it seems like she doesn't really like him, and there's another scene where it seems like she is so invested in making sure that he is happy and he gets away and gets out of these crazy situations he's in the third act of the film, and it just constantly changed back and forth to where I just don't know if there wasn't enough with her character or the time that we got with her was just so scatterbrained, but that's one of the more sizable examples. But even some of the co-workers that he has and relationships that come back into play when you get like the courtroom drama stuff, the aftermath in the third act, that I never really could invest myself in any twists or turns or changing of allegiances that are brought up in the third act because I never could completely understand what the allegiance was in the first place. Like, there's a character in the third act where they're like, all along he's been a Russian spy, and I was like, who the fuck is that guy? When did I see him before? And specifically with the courtroom drama stuff, you know, Nolan is no stranger to telling his stories out of sequence and telling kind of a non-linear narrative, and he does a bit of that here. This is still the most straightforward movie he's ever made, but there's some Nolanisms in there. And to me, it wasn't very clear when you have multiple time periods being spliced throughout the film in different ways where the order of events were. And specifically with the courtroom stuff, I almost feel like it would have been a better way to tell the story if they would have opened the film giving a very clear implication of what that courtroom issue was going to be, and then going back and giving context to all the things that we learned in the beginning of the film. And it just doesn't play out that way. And so the way that he decided to reveal the story, the order of events that he decided to reveal the way that he did just kind of had a little bit of a lack of clarity for me. Maybe a second watch would alleviate that. Maybe a lot of that, again, is attributed to the previous two things that I brought up. They all kind of work together for the same end result of just being a feeling of lack of clarity in a lot of Oppenheimer. And the last thing that I will say is that, you know, Christopher Nolan is no stranger to being accused of not having enough emotion in his films. And I don't think that's ever been a very sound criticism as a blanket statement, because I do think quite a few of his films do achieve a lot of emotion. Interstellar probably being the biggest example. Show me a father that doesn't break down whenever he sees Matthew McConaughey watch that tape of his daughter just aging throughout the years. So I don't think that that's something that's fair to say for his entire catalog. But there are certain films that I could understand that being hailed at that specific movie. This is one of them for me, to where he definitely achieves a sense of dread. He achieves creating conversation and making you think as a viewer and making you invested in Oppenheimer and his state of mind and his regret, especially in the third act of the film. But as far as emotionally connecting to these characters, it didn't achieve that with me. I'd never felt invested in any of his relationships. I never really felt all that invested in any of his friendships. I mean, you have a pretty strong friendship with Matt Damon's character that is steadfast throughout the film, and even that relationship never really gave me any feeling whatsoever. So if you're somebody that has always felt Nolan's a little lacking in bringing his character's emotions through, this might be a movie that doesn't change your mind. All in all, guys, this is a masterful filmmaker at work. And if this is a subject and this is a story that you were really invested in, and especially if you're just a massive film fan, you're a cinephile, you're gonna eat this up. If you have been dying to see this movie, it's probably going to deliver everything you wanted and more. But if you're somebody that isn't easily enamored by those types of things and the actual filmmaking at play, and it's all about just the story, the emotions, and the impact and everything, this one might not be the most entertaining film for you. It's certainly not one of the most entertaining films for me in Nolan's filmography. In conclusion, this is one of those movies that I would say I respect more than I actually enjoy. Well, that's it for this one, guys. If you enjoyed that, please click over here for all my 2023 new release reviews, and I'm gonna put my review of Barbie up here, the other half of Barbenheimer, for you to check out. Very different movie. Please like, share, hit that subscribe button so you don't see videos in the future. I'll probably do another Nolan ranking here very soon. And as always, remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean you have to be.